I want to talk about conflict, and more specifically, the role that communication can have in resolving conflict. Now, those of you who follow my content know that I speak on issues within organizational settings as an IO psychologist, but what prompted my need to talk about conflict and communication is what I'm currently seeing and have been seeing over numerous years that is happening when there's any kind of large-scale political event in the United States. There seems to be this trend where people from opposing sides, since Americans only have two sides, come together and debate each other.
Little human being.
Ooh, his smile is very creepy.
Oh man, Destiny, this is a tough one for you, isn't it?
How is it sexism when we have no barriers today? So we can pick what we want to pick.
Who doesn't have barriers?
Women don't have barriers?
Now, I've yet to see one such debate be a constructive conversation. It ends up inevitably becoming a mudslinging competition where both parties come into the conversation with a lot of frustration and leaves with the same amount of frustration, if not more. I don't think that this is in any way conducive to any kind of productive outcome, and one can go into a conversation yet again and go, well, this side is doing that wrong and the other side is doing something else wrong. So while this apparent trend in public discourse seems to suggest that when we introduce communication into conflict, it makes the conflict so much worse. But that doesn't have to be the case. Now, there are numerous different approaches to constructive communication and healthy communication, functional communication. But I always, regardless of the tool or the approach, I always advocate for communicating from a place of empathy, which of course is much easier said than done when you're having a conversation about issues that you feel very passionate about, or that you're very angry about, or that you feel the other person is doing wrong or is causing harm, anything like that. Now, one such approach that speaks directly to empathy that I like to use is the concept of non-violent communication. It's a model of communication that was proposed quite a while ago by an American psychologist, Marshall Rosenberg. And since its introduction, it has gone through numerous iterations and it's been applied to various different contexts, and it's definitely very useful within the organizational setting. So it has four main components. They are observation, feelings, needs, and requests. Now, before we even get into what these four dimensions entail, it's very important to keep in mind that non-violent communication only works when all parties engaged in the communication is committed to this framework and comes into the communication from a place of goodwill. If one party comes into the communication with plans of deception or manipulation, of course, this falls apart. So all parties concerned needs to be committed to communicate from a place of empathy and understanding. So let's look at the four components. The first component being observation. Here, it's very important to focus on specific things that you observe and can see without attaching any kind of evaluation or criticism or judgment to what you are observing. So already this poses a obstacle because we are so used to giving value judgments as standard with what we observe. I'm observing X and X is bad, or I'm observing Y and Y is good. It's very important that the first step has to be simply stating what is observed. The second facet of nonviolent communication is feelings. So after you've stated what you've observed, you need to communicate what you feel regarding what you've observed. Again, it's very easy here to step in the trap of you made me feel a certain way and therefore you are to blame for any kind of distress or negative experience that I'm having. You have to connect what you are feeling to what you have observed. Also, of course, this is a very dynamic process, and when people are allowed to respond, when we get to the feeling component of non-violent communication, it's also a very easy trap to step in to engage in a process of score settling, where one person says, well, you made me feel bad, and then the other person says, well, you made me feel bad. And that's also when the entire process will fall apart, because we're now engaging in a process of score settling. So your feelings needs to be related to the specific observation and not an exercise in qualifying your own behavior towards someone else's activities because they made you feel a certain way. Then the third component of non-violent communication is the stating of needs. This is extremely important because underlying needs are the things that drive our emotions and can either derail the conversation or it can promote understanding. If you are able to communicate your needs, it is easier for the other person to empathize with you and to understand why you feel a certain way or why you have taken in a certain position that they might be experiencing as oppositional. If you are able to communicate your needs clearly in a way that someone else is able to understand what you are going through, will promote the communication process, and there's a higher likelihood that the other person will be able to empathize with you. Then the final part of non-violent communication is stating requests, and these requests, of course, will be related to your needs. Very important, it is a request, not a demand. People don't respond well to being boxed in or being forced to do something that they don't want to. And if you keep context in mind, if you're engaged in a process of formal nonviolent communication, there's typically a high level of tension. And if you now introduce demands into that tense situation, it's not going to go well. So once you have observed, you've communicated your feelings, you've expressed your real needs, your legitimate needs, and you've then connected that to a request that is not demanding of someone else, and you keep that request open, so it's not an ultimatum either, like now or the conversation is over. It's an open request that the other person or the other party can consider. That keeps the conversation open, that keeps the conversation going, and then that opens up a potential for a loop where you can go into observations again if you continue the conversation. So I hope that everyone is able to use this insight. This is very much a distilled version, and so I highly recommend looking into Marshall Rosenberg's work for yourself if you are interested in exploring alternatives to using communication as a way to resolve conflict in your organization. I'm Cliff. I'm a IO psychologist and people advisor. If you would like to talk to me about conflict in your organization or ways to use communication to resolve it, go to the link in my bio, schedule a free chat, or leave your thoughts in the comments.